see the council.
But she can't hear us?
We just turned up the sound.
Okay, good. We're ready to go?
We are ready to go.
Okay, this is a meeting of the Open Space and Ecology Committee on Wednesday, November 6th, starting at 6:45 because we had technical difficulties. And thank you for your patience for those who might be watching from the public. The first thing is the adoption of the agenda. I would like to add an item just of information to the agenda to bring the committee up to date on what was discussed at Monday night City Council meeting in regard to the draft EIR comment period. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there a move to adopt the agenda as amended?
Adopt the
Amended.
agenda as amended.
Okay.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. There are no people in the audience for oral communications. Does any of the committee have oral communications? No.
Oh, I'll just do this.
Oh.
Elena.
What?
Oh, I had these done forever ago for you from the day in the park, but
Thank you. I thought they were for there.
I was sick,
Nice.
so, and then I was
Thank
busy,
you.
so there you go.
Thanks.
Show them, hold them up for the audience. These are the beautiful
Fabric I had.
bags that were Barbara made at the Day in the Park for environmental and reuse.
Nice.
These are scraps of fabric, guys. Cool.
Gorgeous.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my pleasure. Use them with love.
I will.
Okay. So just to bring everybody up to date, on Monday night, the council had a letter from Anya Miller, the chairperson for the Citizens Committee, asking for an extension on the comment period for the draft EIR. And as you all know from our last meeting, I was not allowed to formally request that from the Open Space and Ecology Committee because that had not been agendized prior to the meeting. But apparently it wasn't agendized on the City Council's agenda either, so it was just a discussion point and they could not take action. It will be agendized on November 18th of whether they will grant an extension on the comment period. Their leanings seem to be, from the discussion, that they would grant an extension of perhaps 30 days or perhaps 60 days. 30 days would take us to right before Christmas. One council member wants it finished by Christmas. And the other would take it through into January, where we'd have a little bit of breathing room after the holidays to wrap things up as best as possible. One of the ensuing discussion was very enlightening, and I recommend my fellow committee members watch that discussion on the live minutes from the meeting. It's on tape 2. The discussion starts at minute 14 with Anya reading the letter, but the comments from our new city attorney start at 34.44, and that's the part that he discusses about the timeline for the certification of the EIR. And generally speaking, in CEQA law, the expectation is that an environmental impact report would be certified 1 year from the issuance date of the draft EIR, which would be in June. And this particular one has extenuating circumstances, so that would probably be extended. But if there was a lot of ambiguity there, but it was obvious to me as an observer and also as a participant in discussing it that the impression we got from our subcommittee when they came to speak to us about the draft EIR and their plans for how we were going to have a project in place before we certified the EIR is probably not the timeline that we'll be working on. Because I think they didn't realize that you can't just keep asking for extensions. You have to either certify or reject within a certain amount of period, or it becomes litigious.
So you mentioned that in cases where there are some kind of extenuating or unusual circumstances, the whole period for certification might be extended, but do you know who would grant that or how that
Well-
would be done?
My impression is that we would do that and hope that the developer or whoever filed the project would not sue us over the delay.
I see.
I mean, if you would like, we could invite the attorney to talk about this issue, and so that way you can make a decision as to how you would like to, if you'd like to weigh in at the 18th meeting, because you do have another meeting on the 13th. So we could agendize this for the 13th, and therefore you could have a full conversation and discussion about it,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to do it tonight.
Can I suggest that each of you maybe watch that segment of the meeting and then let's agendize it for the 13th and we can either decide to discuss it or not.
Right.
I think we're kind of out of time either way, because even if we do get an extension, we are short on time and we really don't need to spend a lot of time discussing what they can and cannot do.
Right.
We just need to put the pedal to the metal and do the best job we can.
But you could also, at that time, just, have a recommendation from the Open Space and Ecology Committee as to when you think the extension on comments should extend to,
Okay.
as opposed to,
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. So the comments start at minute 34, the first round of comments from, the whole thing on the draft EIR starts at minute 14 on the second tape on the minutes from last Monday night. The lawyers' comments start at 34 minutes. And then there are more comments at 42 minutes, but the discussion runs for, I guess, about 40 minutes altogether. So
How's that accessed?
you just go on the city website and click on that meeting, and over on the side, there's two little boxes with the minutes, and you click on one, and then it gets big, and you can, do the little triangle, and it'll start playing. You can move the triangle forward to the minute that you want to start listening. And then it reviews it all. So I think it's very enlightening, and I think that we have a lot of work to do, and I think some people were kind of taken by surprise. So the next part is progress on comments, and Stuart, you gave us a document here in our packet. Do you want to go over this?
Sure. As I told you, I sent comments to Terry. I was actually expecting to have responses back for your meeting tonight. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything in my in-basket today, or this evening. I thought I was going to get them. But what he had basically said is that he was going to try and get them out to me by the end of today. I haven't seen them. He said that there was a lot of requests for more information. I then sent him back a question about how that relates to the EIR itself, which is what's in the middle of the page. And then on the top of the page is his response to me as to how EIRs typically deal with issues about information. He says it much better than I ever could.
Okay.
But basically, there's, three, he says there's three typical scenarios on a request for information is dealt with. If it's necessary, you can try and read it. If the information is necessary to understand an impact being analyzed or to the analysis itself, and it's actually missing, then typically the consultant will add the information in response to answer the question or state that the information has been added to the EIR. If the information is actually already in the EIR or if dependencies, the response would typically direct the commenter to where the information is found, and then if the information isn't pertinent to the project, the response will typically explain why it isn't and why the information needn't be added to the EIR.
And that's all in these comments that you have here for us. Okay.
I think that's going to be one of the questions as we get back his comments on on your comments. If he says that this is an information item, the question then comes is how does that, how do you want to deal with that as part of the formal comment?
Okay.
keeping this kind of information in mind.
Does anyone have any questions on that, or questions on the previous discussion? Before we move in.
But as soon as I get the comments back from Terry, I will email them out to everybody, so that way we don't have to wait till we get to the meeting to see what his comments are.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll remind him that we're having another meeting next week, and it would be really nice to have him back
Yeah.
in time for you guys to be able to start reviewing that and finalizing the comments.
Yeah, there is even though the council's intent is to, I believe, from hearing what I heard on Monday night, the intent is to extend the deadline at least by 1 month or 30 more days. There is no guarantee that that will actually happen, depending on what research the lawyers come up with between now and their meeting. Okay? So we need to push ahead with the idea that we won't get any additional time. And then if we do get additional time, we could just do a better job of it. Is there any other questions on that?
Out of curiosity, it's just so I can book a room, do you want me to book the room for the Wednesdays in December as well?
I'm rapidly losing the ability to balance this commitment with my other commitments as indicated by my previous absences and upcoming absences, and I can't commit to weekly meetings really past anything that we've already decided.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really challenging, Stuart, through December. If we do get an extension into January, I would love for us to schedule 2 meetings in early January to do a
I'll be
wrap.
gone for those.
Oh, you'll be gone, shoot.
And I'll be gone for January.
Okay,
I'll be gone at the end of January.
yeah. I think we're just going to have to wait and see what happens and schedule next week if we
I'm
can.
just trying to,
I know,
Yeah,
I know.
thought.
It's really, we're really getting to be between a rock and a hard place. Just so you know, the attrition rate on the Citizens Committee, they started with 23 people, they're down to 10.
Yikes.
So I
Yeah.
really, really admire the perseverance of our committee members to stay at it.
May I suggest, actually, that I hate to do this, I don't want to come to more meetings either, but given that the holidays are coming up, and if we do get an extension, it sounds to me like the only way we can take it, or the only time we could really take advantage of it would be toward the beginning of December. That we maybe reserve the room for the first week in December.
Parks and Recreation has the room for that, that's going to be their regular meeting, but we could find another room in the building.
Yeah, we'll find another room in the building
And
then.
maybe we won't need it, but that seems to me like, for me anyway, that's the only possibility to come to an extra meeting.
Yeah, let's do that, and,
First Wednesday in December?
yeah,
And hope we don't need it.
and hope we don't need it. We're scheduled for the 13th and the 20th, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
November.
Yeah, and then that would be Wednesday, December 4th. And then do we have our regular meeting
Yeah,
in
we
Dec-
have the regular one on the 11th.
on the 11th? Well, and then that would be that. If we wouldn't have the meeting on the 4th if we don't have an extension, the meeting on the 11th is our regular meeting, and then we would be done until January.
Do we have a lot of normally scheduled stuff to do at our regular meeting in December? Because maybe we could dedicate that meeting to
I was going.
this if we get an extension.
Yeah,
Maybe
if we
that.
get an extension, our regular meeting in December would probably also be on this, as well as December 4th, and then that's it.
Yeah,
You know,
that makes
because
sense.
then we'd have to wrap up and make sure everything was buttoned up in January. Really depends what we get. And so I'm saying schedule it and we can cancel it.
Okay.
And our regular meeting for November, we won't be covering any of our normal business unless it's urgent. That's next week. And I did talk to Maria, and she's going to go ahead and put the zip car forward without us reviewing it again.
Okay. That's,
Does that sound okay?
yeah.
Okay. So anyway, again, kudos for your persistence in continuing to plow through this. because it's not an easy task as exhibited by the attrition rate in the other committee. And they haven't even gotten to hazardous materials yet. Yeah. Okay, so let's, unless anybody else has other comments.
I have a
Sean?
question. So Stuart, who else is reviewing the CIR other than our committee and the Citizens Committee?
Universal Paragon Corporation.
Well, I mean, I think they send it out to, the Regional Water Quality Board and DTS. I mean, a lot of governmental agencies.
State Fish and Game is looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, all those would be reviewing it from whatever perspective they would review EIRs like this from.
Right, and what,
I would imagine San Francisco is, has somebody reviewing it. I would imagine, maybe South San Francisco because of the, impacts on the traffic circulation. They might be reviewing it from that perspective. San Francisco from the growth inducements and all, and that issues. So I would imagine there's, BB CAG is reviewing it for the hazardous materials.
Stuart, have any of those agencies submitted comments?
I have not. I mean, they wouldn't submit them to me, so I don't know. I
Can you
can
find
check.
out for us?
I can check to see if any comments have been received.
Okay. Can I make a request that we ask each of those agencies, send each of those agencies a letter asking for their comments?
And from the Open Space and Ecology Committee?
Yes.
or is that something we would want the council to do on behalf of the city? Just so that the city gets the full breadth of examination by all the affected agencies.
Well, we don't have time to direct the council to direct that action. Because their next meeting is on the 18th, it would have to be agendized, and then then the letters would go out, and if indeed the comment due date, it ends up being the 22nd, we would not get any comments if they were not already in the pipeline.
And so those outside agencies are aware that the 22nd is the final due date?
Yes.
There is in the appendices to this DEIR, which are on DVD, there are a bunch of comments on maybe the announcement of the DEIR. I'm trying to remember what it
Notice
is.
of preparation.
Yeah, the notice of preparation. So there are a bunch of comments in there, and that was I ran across the one from the Tuolumne River Trust, and that was why I happened to invite them. Now, I certainly have not read all those comments thoroughly, but some of that information might be kind of useful if people want to take a look at it. If we don't have time to get actual comments, I think some of the things that were said upon the notice of preparation were
Where
sort of
exactly was that,
interesting.
Glenn?
It's Appendix A, and there's just a whole list of comments. There was one from some water agency. I don't remember. I don't think it was the BAA, the Bay Area Water Quality Management District, but there was one from. I just don't remember, but there were several comments in there. So if you want to flip through those, you can get an idea of what some people were thinking about it. They wouldn't be responses to the detailed body of the DEIR, but some flags went up, kind of.
Are we stepping outside of our area to ask for sending a letter and a reminder for soliciting comments for the draft DIR?
I'm not sure.
Well,
But you know me, I'm always willing to
Does
step
everybody
outside.
on the committee want to support that, or what do you think? Because
I could see where it may not be appropriate to come from our committee. It should come from a higher body within the city. I mean, that's the appropriate chain of command.
Personally, I think if we had more time, it would be great, but we don't. And I think, relevant agencies know about this. They will be commenting on it, and they may catch things that we don't.
Right.
And so I think that's kind of how we should look at it. We should hope that there are enough bodies looking at this thing that, things will get caught. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but we are running out of time.
yeah, okay. Well, that's why I was hoping that we could just do that as an administrative thing.
And I'll check to see if anybody's resubmitted comments and if those are available for public review, and if they are, I will distribute them to your committee.
That'd be great.
And who has and who has not?
Well, they would never
Well-
know who has not, but they would know who has.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to growth inducements then. I just am concerned because, I haven't, the Planning Commission hosted meetings for comments were extremely poorly attended.
Yeah.
And that was of great concern. So, okay. Significant and unavoidable environmental impacts. Who wants to start?
Why doesn't Barbara start since she did?
I think that'd be a
Written
great idea. And I also really kind of think that, well, anyway, let's go. Barbara, you're on.
Okay. My first comment was a lengthy one. It refers to page 613, figure 6.1b. In reviewing cumulative impacts, appears that only projects within approximately an 8-mile radius were considered. And the U.S. average commute is 24 minutes. I failed to find the commute data in miles. However, an estimate of 12 to 24 miles seems reasonable for a commute distance. Average, no, this isn't even California. There was a big thing. I found a lot of data about Bay Area commuters being super commuters and commuting much greater than the U.S. average, but I just stuck with the U.S. average so that I wasn't skewing things. Given the mobility of U.S. workers, airborne pollution, and greenhouse gases, it seems a larger area should have been considered for impacts. And then I just threw out there, 12 to 24 miles for housing, population, and traffic. Now, that's not exactly scientific based, but to me it seems much more rational and reasonable than the 8-mile area that they chose to look at. And then even this was even more important, I thought, that a still larger area is needed for air pollution and greenhouse gases. One has only to think of the acid rain issues between Canada and the U.S. to understand that airborne pollution can and does travel substantial distances in potent concentrations and cause environmental damage. And then I just pulled up, so on page 619, the DEIR states that toxic air contaminants produced at distant locations do not readily combine and create concentrations of toxic air contaminants in any single location. I thought that was pretty absurd in the body of science around the issue, and I just pulled up this one quote from a website I have quoted on the bottom of the page, or referenced on the bottom of the page, that toxic air contaminants produced, one quote. In 1995, the estimated transboundary flow of sulfur dioxide from the U.S. to Canada was between 3.5 and 4.2 million tons per year. Now, that's just one pollutant, and we're talking about it going across the U.S. border into Canada. So the fact that they don't want to look at air pollution moving around in the Bay Area is kind of bizarre to me. So instead of using the roughly 8-mile circumference, the DEIR states that for airborne pollution, they use 1,000 feet.
1,000 feet?
1,000 feet. Yeah. So, and that reference is on page 619.
So the questions that come up for me is, what is the average commute distance in San Mateo County for residents of San Mateo County that are employed outside the home? And what is the average commute distance in the 9 Bay Area counties for also people employed outside the home? And that, I'd like that both in time and distance. Because, and I'd also like to know what they, how their proximity models were determined. What were they using? to determine such a narrow proximity. And what in the hell were they thinking when they were only doing it for 1,000 feet? Jesus, their dust goes further than 1,000 feet every day.
I would just like to say I'm not entirely sure that that's completely off. I think some pollutants can travel quite a long ways if they have wind, but one of the reasons why all the SO2 traveled so far was that most SO2 comes from coal-burning power plants. And one of the things that power plants originally did to minimize local pollution was to install really tall smokestacks. And the result of that was that the pollution was able to travel for much longer distances. So I am not, I don't have specific information myself, but I'm suspecting that at least the heavier pollutants will probably not travel all that far away from where they're generated. I do think, though, that we've also got another class of pollutants, which is those are called criteria pollutants, and some of those are going to be the products of internal combustion engines and things like that. They're not toxic. They're not considered toxic, or they're not called toxic per se. They're called criteria pollutants, and those, there will be a lot of cumulative generation of those pollutants. And as we were talking about when we did the air quality section, that kind of pollution, a lot of it blows out of the Bay Area and ends up in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
So, Glenn, you apparently know, I did the research I could manage, but
Sure.
you know more than this. But the point is that, this is not adequate.
Cumulative,
The
very
cumulative. It's just not, yeah, go ahead.
Let me just say that I think your notion of stepping back a little bit further and looking at a wider area in terms of trying to assess the cumulative impacts is a really good point.
Yeah, I agree.
So I would certainly agree with that part of it.
Yeah. And so we need to frame questions regarding, that. I'm sure there are studies available citing air pollutants, these criteria pollutants that you're talking about, of how far they travel. Think about those fires they had in Napa and Livermore Valley just recently, and because the wind was coming this way, that pollutant came here and burned our eyes and everything like that. And the same thing is like tonight, they're doing night operations at the quarry, and we will probably be smelling asphalt, and that is definitely farther than 1,000 feet.
Is that where that asphalt smells?
Yes. And so now they're posting on the city website when they're having night operations at the quarry, because last time they got several calls.
Huh, I didn't know that. I've been smelling it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much they can generalize about that unless there are pretty steady wind patterns, because it's really variable according to the weather and at the height at which the pollutant is emitted and all sorts of things. So I'm not sure how possible.
I'm sure that
It is.
California Air Quality Control Board has some studies in regard to that, and I think that they should be added to the draft EIR.
Well, and we mentioned the prevailing winds do take pollutants out of the Bay Area and deposit them elsewhere, and that's the impact I'm actually
Concerned about.
most
yeah.
worried about, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else on that issue? So the criteria, what criteria did they use for their 1,000 feet? And also, do they have studies showing where it's definitely further than 1,000 feet that they've decided not to include? Your next one, Barbara?
Sure. The build-out of the project site under, and this is a quote from page 16, paragraph 2, build-out of the project site under each development scenario would result in disjointed and inconsistent development across the project site, resulting in a poorly designed area with overall adverse effects on existing visual character. Now, I did a search of the PDF for 4A and failed to find this language in that chapter. And personally, I found this disturbing because I don't think these kinds of observations should be relegated to the back of the DEIR. And so I'm wondering if that language was originally in that section and struck, or how it was. I did a search and it didn't come up on the PDF. But that doesn't mean it couldn't, I didn't, find it exactly. It could still have been there in some other form. But I didn't remember it and I couldn't find it. So that comment may be a non-comment depending on what everybody else can find or remember or sees.
Oops, sorry.
I thought they suggested a bunch of design mitigations for that issue.
Sure.
So I think it got mentioned, but I
Okay.
couldn't say what page.
That was, you said what section was
That
that?
would have been 4A, I believe, which is aesthetics.
Yeah.
And it says mitigation what?
4A-3.
4A-3.
I looked at the PDF, maybe I should have
Yeah,
gone into the
all
book.
site-specific development within the project shall be subject to the following minimum standards, et cetera. And it talks about,
Do you have it? Oh, you're looking.
yeah,
18?
We're trying to figure out if this language originally appeared in section 4A.
Yeah, let me.
I don't see it in section 4A. That's on page 4A-35 is the mitigation measure.
Is that for design?
That's under aesthetics, and it just says the application of city requirements to project. Approval of a specific plan is consistent with along with the implementation process. Incremental development consistent with design guidelines and landscape plans, the city's design review process would ensure that the substantially different development types and development intensities within the project would not be visually adverse compared to existing conditions. The overall intensity of project site development is substantially greater than the development intensity set forth in the Brisbane General Plan. As part of the city's design review process, the Planning Commission must make findings that include determination that the orientation of the buildings, et cetera. The result would be an adverse effect due to the visual incompatibilities between project site development and its surroundings. The conclusion is this impact would be significant, and it talks about to ensure development of a cohesive urban aesthetic across the site and support a well-designed urban environment, et cetera.
Okay, well, maybe that comment isn't terribly important then, but I wasn't able to.
I think it's kind of important because a lot of, over the life of the project, a lot of ideas about design will change, and about what is aesthetic will change.
What page was that, Michelle?
That's on page A, 4.A-34 and 35.
Thank you.
And so they talk about some very specific things in the mitigation measure, like fenestration and building articulation and building materials and signage and that type of thing. All site-specific development projects within the project site shall be subject to the following minimum standards. But the problem with that is that over 30 years, those minimum standards will change dramatically. Think about how building materials and building styles and even architectural engineering has changed in the last 30 years here. What was state-of-the-art buildings at Sierra Point now look rather dated. So I think that is actually kind of somewhat valid comment. Really, it talks about, I think the comment should be more like, how is the mitigation going to account for change in building materials, aesthetic values, et cetera, over the course of a 30 to 50-year build-out. And I don't believe that's been taken into account.
My next comment, maybe you can speak to this one too, Michelle, because I actually biological resources, one of the few chapters I have not read. But that comment struck me, although mobile species might be able to survive continuing habitat loss by moving to new areas, movement corridors are limited. Again, I did because I hadn't read that chapter and wasn't familiar with it, I did a PDF search and wasn't able to locate it in biological resources, which is 4C. Do you know off the top of your head if that
Yeah.
speaks to that?
I think it's in there.
It is?
No,
Okay.
what it says is that, like, for instance, and I brought this up when I made my comments, is that it says that they won't disturb the nests of the birds in the trees, so they won't cut the trees down during nesting season. But they don't talk about where the birds are going to go while new trees grow, or even if new trees will grow. And they made some comments about San Bruno Mountain being, this huge habitat where all of these animals could go, but that's just ludicrous, because they really are not, it's not the same habitat. That's not all protected, there are not enough trees, and it's all part of the comments I made under biological resources. That one is it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they think that.
Yeah. I had another one also on page 21 that was language that I could not recall nor either find in the search of the PDF regarding a mitigation for the proposal of bird strikes to increase nighttime visibility of the buildings. So it sounds like they're talking about lighting the buildings at night. And I was wondering what this effect this would have on bats and night-flying insects. And clearly going to have a significant impact on light pollution. And so I was wondering, I couldn't find it under mitigation measures, so I was just perplexed that it's a mitigation measure that was listed there as having, it seemed to indicate it was somewhere else, but I don't recall that and couldn't find it. There's a couple points where I just feel like the language and the cumulative section is a little more assertive and a little less equivocal than it is in the chapter 4, and that was personally disturbing to me because I don't know that everybody's going to go get all the way to the back of the DEIR and read chapter 6, and I think that if this is really a document for public information, they should be laying their cards up on the table up front and not burying their aces in the bag. So,
Yeah, because like, for instance, on page 4C-41, the mitigation measure says, the following steps shall be taken to avoid direct losses of nests, eggs, and nestlings, and direct impact to special status avian species. But it says direct losses. It doesn't talk about long-term losses. It doesn't talk about long-term loss of the habitat. It talks about, well, we're not going to break their eggs this year, but they're not going to have anywhere to lay them next year. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty much the same for all other things, in regard to bats and impacts to raptors and bats as a result of Operation On-Site Wind Power Generation. And they make it sound like that's the part that's going to kill bats, but they don't talk about some of the other things that are going to affect bats. So they really kind of dance around it and don't really address it. I haven't found where they really address it.
can anybody else recall that nighttime lighting of buildings comment anywhere? I don't know if maybe it was struck as a bad idea and somebody just forgot to take it out of cumulative impacts or what, but I would like some sort of comment, and maybe my comment is adequate as stated, to chase down this issue. Because that, additional nighttime lighting, although it may have some positive impacts, definitely is going to have some negative impacts as well.
Yeah, they make it in here sound like because there will be open areas under each of the development scenarios, including Visitation Creek area, that would increase habitat quality on site compared to existing conditions, not true.
No, because I mean, one of the main things wildlife likes is an absence of humanity.
And nice dark places, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's just kind of ridiculous.
yeah. This is I think a very small comment that on page 23 that covers a very large concept. Significance of these resources is site-specific, and they do not involve a comment involving a resource type or theme. Well, the land itself is a resource. In order to do our due diligence by our environment, we have to appreciate and that fact and have a mindset that accounts for that. So I think that is just kind of a broad comment through the whole. It's a very broad, very, very broad point, but I'm not sure that necessarily needs to be a, well, I don't know, what do you guys think? Does that need to be a comment on the DEIR, or is that just, me hugging trees again?
No, I think it should be. Because just plain old open land is definitely a resource.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Finite one at that.
Yeah, it's a scarce resource these days.
Yeah.
Renewable.
So on page 32, because each community's general plan sets forth policies to protect the character of existing development, it's anticipated that cumulative projects adopted in a manner consistent with those general plans would not cumulative degrade the existing character of the land uses. It's not, and then my comment was, it's not possible to gloss over these cumulative impacts under conditions where the DER specifies changing the general plan as a mitigation measure. You get into a loop there, a causational loop. It's okay because the general plan is going to protect us from, these impacts, except we're going to change the general plan when it suits us. So I just felt like that was just, I don't know, it's just silly talk.
Yeah, because they don't talk about what would happen if we didn't change that part of the general plan. Because at this
Certain things couldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So they want us to change the general plan so that they can have their project, but then they even acknowledge in this that our general plan is our protection. So,
And one thing they make it sound like is that as soon as you change one thing in the general plan, it's all open to be changed however they want. And that's really not the truth. Because Lloyd Zola said several times, well, the general plan is already out of compliance because of the traffic component and how long you have to wait at the signal light. Well, that's easy. Change the timing on the signal light, and leave the general plan alone. If that's the only change we need to the general plan. So why didn't they consider that
yeah.
as a mitigation measure?
Yeah, I agree. Or make it a roundabout, heck, whatever. And this was page 34, table 6-4. Shows the cumulative traffic noise impacts for 2 projects at a time. And I found this really laughable since we have 10 or more projects in the area to consider. I mean, what happened to the other 8?
Yeah.
And I mean, how can we assume that they're not going to add to the traffic noise? And if for some reason they're not, then the table should show the negative and not just leave it unspoken and ambiguous. Anybody else want to jump in?
Nope.
Okay. Page 35, San Bruno Mountain has the potential to heighten acoustical propagation under certain meteorological conditions. Yes, absolutely, it does. And we've made this comment a number of times in this committee. And I was, again, very, left me wondering why this acknowledged fact is missing from the relevant chapters earlier on in the DEIR.
One of the things about San Bruno Mountain that makes it what I would call like vibrationally active. So it does have a lot of, the underlying matrix, there's a lot of like crystals. You know how you find crystals on the mountain all the time? It's a much older landmass. It's not a layered landmass like the Franciscan chert that characterizes, say, the Glen Park area or anything like that. And so sound and vibration transmit themselves through this medium much differently than they do in other areas. And they have not taken that into account at all. It's one of the reasons why it's so horrendous when there's pile driving or when an airplane goes over. The vibration of the mountain itself increases the acoustical effect and the vibration effect. And that's not taken into account at all. And I don't see where they used any studies that were done here as opposed to using studies done elsewhere and applying them to here.
Yeah.
So do they have any studies done here that they can apply or have applied that were actually done in Brisbane, on San Bruno Mountain, or in our own area?
Yeah, we've flogged that horse to death, and it was just very interesting to me to see it openly acknowledged in this section and
Completely ignored elsewhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
41, I was just, paragraph 2, I was just absolutely confused, and maybe I was just being dense, and my fellow committee members can clear this up for me. Because payment of school fees provides mitigation in full for direct school impacts. I was just like, huh? What impacts do school fees mitigate, and what school fees are paid? I mean, if they're talking about a school fee, are they talking about, I mean, a public school, are they talking about property taxes? I was
So
just
there is
completely-
actually a fee paid by development for schools.
That's
for
what they're talking
capital
about.
projects.
Okay.
So I think what they're talking about is that the fees paid for by any development, in theory,
Okay.
pays for the additional space needed by those people who would be attending the school.
Well, that's not clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could maybe move that comment just down to typos and wording.
On page 640, it says payment of school facilities impact fees mandated under SB 50 is the exclusive method of considering and mitigating the direct impacts of school facilities.
Okay. Well, that's fine then. I must have missed, I got to admit that this chapter was a nodder.
Right.
It was not my favorite. Some of the chapters are actually readable. This was not one of them.
I mean, that's also
So I may
like
have missed
20 plus years of that kind of information, so.
Yeah.
Stuart, how does that work over time, though? Because as soon as you have, X number of students, you have school impacts, but payment of school facilities mandated under SB 50, does that take accommodation for staged development like this? It's going to take place over 30 years?
I mean, my understanding is it takes account of, if you were to have residential buildings, it takes into account of, as those residents build, that there's money that's set aside for it, and it creates the ability for the school to build additional space.
What if there is no residential?
Well, then there's no additional children who are going to the schools.
But there would be children coming from people who work there.
Well, I think that's really up to the school district as to how they take children from their workforce.
But when Lloyd Zola said they would be calculating that as part of the schools.
Right, and
part of
then
the children.
the impact fees would be calculated as part of that for the buildings. I mean, it's state law that says this is how it works.
Okay.
And state law says this is the mitigation for that. I mean, we may disagree that mitigation is adequate, but, from a state perspective, they've decided it is.
Okay.
All right. My next comment, I was absent during recreation, so maybe Kima can talk to this one, and it
Yeah.
may end up being more of a planning commission comment anyway, I think.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, and I noticed this in your comments and was actually going to comment about this. In the recreational, in the chapter about recreation, they did mention that employees also need to have recreational things. Typically, those are, and I'm going by personal experience, not what I read in the recreation section. Typically, those are part of the corporate campus where those people work. So if they build a building, like for example, my company has 3 buildings and one of them has a gym in it, you know, and in between the 3 buildings is a soccer field. You know, all of those things, and we have 2 volleyball courts off between 2 other buildings, but those are all part of our corporate campus. You know, so it's not necessarily, you're absolutely right in your comment that you have to have recreational facility for daytime users.
Yeah.
I'm just not entirely sure whether that necessarily means that the city has to do it.
Yeah,
I think it's worth
fine.
exploring, for sure.
Okay. And then I think this, so, does anybody else want to add to that? Glenn?
It's not really adding to your comment, but it is about the issue of recreational resources, and I was baffled by this. I read it a couple times. On page, you have to look at Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. In Chapter 5, on page 16, it says that,
On page 16,
yeah,
recreational resources.
yes, it says, the DSP, it's basically they're talking about the no-build alternative here, but then they bring up, in comparison, the DSP and the DSPV scenarios, and they say they would result in the development of substantial open space areas, but also, in brackets, those scenarios would also create demands for recreational facilities in excess of the facilities they provide as measured by the standards of the Quimby Act and the city's municipal code. And then on page 642, it says, so basically what I got from this part of Chapter 5 was that the recreational facilities as planned by in both developer-supported variations are inadequate. But then on page 642, it says, that it is adequate. So which is it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what it says.
Yeah, in Chapter 4, in the recreation section, it said that they were all way over adequate.
So,
But that doesn't sound like it to me.
all right, well, so they're saying both things in different places here, so which is it?
Speaking with a forked tongue.
Yeah.
It's just not very consistent, because in Chapter 5, that sentence does say those scenarios would create demands for recreational facilities in excess of the facilities they provide, which says to me they're not adequate.
Yeah.
So I don't know, which is it? I don't claim to know, but
Is it possible to figure out how much recreational area would in fact be required underneath the Quimby Act?
well, I
And
think it
then-
says how much is required.
Yeah?
And it's a multiplication problem, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
they need to fix the,
Well,
maybe it's a writing problem.
One of
Maybe
the-
they said something they didn't mean, I don't know.
One of the things about the Quimby Act is that it relates to residents. So the developer-sponsored plan has residents but adds
Right.
parks, but the community-supported plan doesn't have residents, and so it's way over in recreational
Right, I
facilities.
understand that.
Because there wasn't any, you know,
I understand
Yeah.
that, but this is both of the instances I'm talking about are discussing the developer-supported plan with its housing, as I read it. In any case, it's an apparent anomaly and is confusing, and maybe if they just need to write it, maybe there's a reason,
yeah.
maybe there's some understandable reason for it, but if so, it's poorly written and they need to rewrite it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate comment, absolutely.
And then also, how are they calculating residents versus housing units?
Well, they've given projected numbers of residents at
Yeah.
several points in the DEIR, so I'm not quibbling with how they calculate them, but they just seem to, all I'm talking about is that they seem to be saying two different things about the developer-supported plans and the open space provisions.
Yep.
At least two, but these are the only
I
two.
mean, I think what it is, it's a cumulative impact issue versus a on-site issue. Because what, you know, when I read it, they're talking about from a there's other recreational areas from other projects or that are off-site. So if you take it as a cumulative perspective, there's enough land available. But if it's on-site only, then it's not, which is what Chapter 5 talks about, is on-site for that.
Yeah.
And Chapter 6 talks about cumulative with all the other projects.
Except that it doesn't talk about cumulative impacts in every paragraph. I mean, it talks about site. They need to clarify what they mean.
That could be.
You might be right, Stuart, but the answer, I think, is not satisfactory.
Right, you might be right, but they need to explain which is it, what are they talking about?
Okay.
So my next comment is on page 43, paragraph 3.
I like this one.
Wind speed reductions of as much as 20% would occur over small areas near the shore at the CSPRA windsurf launch site. I'm sure the ESA associates would also consider up to a 20% reduction in their fees less than significant. Now, that might need to be reworded before it goes in. However, and I think that comment could stand for a great number of their mitigation measures and thresholds throughout the DEIR. Because we had this conversation before about how, you know, if somebody decreases my chance of falling off over the edge of a cliff by 10%, you know, by putting up a 2-foot tall railing, I don't really feel that the threat to my life has been mitigated. So I'm not sure what the committee would like to do with that, but
Well,
there it is.
I'll tell you one thing. When you read this section about wind here under cumulative impacts, this is ridiculous. It does not. This project will have is already having severe impacts on the windsurfing area in Candlestick Cove. And in here they cite the Executive Park project and the Candlestick Point Hunters Point project, but those projects are not in the path of the prevailing winds that the windsurfers use. And so it's ludicrous to make any kind of comparison from any kind of wind project that they did for that. Then the other part of it is they talk about the wind study that they did on the Baylands itself. That wind study was specifically done to try to figure out what wind speeds were available for use of wind turbines for energy. And the anemometer was up high, whereas windsurfers are looking at surface wind on the bay. And wind on the bay is a very, how can I say it?
Fickle?
It's not really fickle. It's very patterned. It definitely shifts, but surface wind on the bay is highly affected by development and buildings and wind shadows. And Candlestick Point is an amazing windsurfing area that will be destroyed by this. And to say there's no significant impact or that it's not even worth doing the proper studies on is ridiculous, because already the impact has been extremely significant just with the dirt piles that are up to 70 feet now. So,
Do we have any evidence of that we could submit with a comment?
we should get some from the windsurfing group.
Does somebody want to do that?
Like, we can ask, yeah. Because there's a whole windsurfing organization that's protesting this. I mean, they didn't even study this and windsurfing is an important recreational resource that will be
Yeah.
destroyed.
Yeah, I'm fine with it as long as we have some evidence besides just our
Hearsay.
statement.
Right.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's that the EIR should have sought evidence, and instead, they're just brushing it,
We can say that, too.
yeah.
One of the problems, and we discussed this in the recreational resources section, was that the windsurfing group did not give a quantitative threshold at which the quality would be degraded significantly, and so the EIR kind of pointed to that and said, well, we can't really say it's going to be bad, so it's not going to be bad, and they kind of dodge it by the fact that the windsurfing group doesn't actually specify that. And I think it was one of my comments in that meeting was that we should solicit a quantitative number, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about here in checking with the windsurfing group, but we should have the DEIR actually solicit that number and react to that number from the windsurfing community, rather than just copping out and saying, well, they didn't tell us what number below which would suck, and so we're not going to then be able to say it. It was a bit of a cop-out.
Wait a minute, so do you think they do have numbers, or?
They may or may not, but the point is that when they were, oh God, what was it called? That condition was actually added as a result of verbal comments, and as a result of, the comment period at the publication of the DEI, or not at the publication, when they announced.
Preparation?
Notice of prep.
Yeah. And so they actually, provided that commentary, but they didn't actually define the number at which it would be. And I think that number is important. They need to come up with a number, and then the DEIR should reflect that rather than the no number, so, no
So they
judgment.
might have it by now.
They might, yeah. I think it sounded like they just omitted to put it in. They just didn't give a threshold, and that's kind of what the DEIR pointed out.
So Kima, how could we phrase a question, if we don't get the data from them, how could we phrase a question about, where is the data that shows that the threshold is not there?
Well, I think that they should reach out to the windsurfing community and make them give them a number, I mean.
And not just for
Well,
our
I think the
area.
windsurfers would probably like to keep 100% of what they have.
Yeah, but I think, granted, or they'd like the wind to increase, sure.
Yeah.
But the question is, how much would a loss of how much wind or an increase in turbulence would degrade it, significantly, and they need to provide a number. I mean, that's really, I agree that I'm sure they don't want to lose any, but the question is, that's not really the question. The question is, how much would it be to make it degraded?
Well, I know you're correct in terms of the DEIR, but I'm still an idealist, and I still think that in an ideal world, this project would be adding to our standards of living, and I think that would include windsurfers.
Sure. Oh, no disagreement. I mean, and to your point, in your comment, it could be that even 20% is much larger than the threshold. It could be the threshold is 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
That they would consider significant. So, it doesn't really take away from your point. I completely agree with that.
And I think from a windsurfer's perspective, it's not, the degradation would occur with turbulence more than lack of, or decrease of wind speed.
I am not qualified to answer that.
As a sailor, I
Yeah.
say that it's turbulence.
Yeah, okay.
Of course, when you have turbulence on a sailboat, you just stop moving forward, but on a windsurf, you got to land in the water.
Sorry to say this, but it's almost 8 o'clock. I am leaving at 9, and we
Yep.
have
Let's go on.
quite a long ways to go.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Okay, onward and upward.
I'm going to fast forward speak now. 48, I also comment on the problem of landfill capacity in 4.0. However, the situation is made clearer here. The current landfill serving the project site would reach full capacity by 2025 or earlier, with the exception of one landfill, which is projected to reach capacity in 2077. Since a 20-year build-out would reach completion in 2034 or later, this project would be completely reliant on the one remaining landfill for about half of the project life. My question, and that includes everything in the area, presumably, my question is the 2077 closing date based on the current rate of use or the higher rate of use that will result when all other landfills are closed and 100% of solid waste generation will be handled by the one site only. And so there are some questions in there and some comments in there. Does anybody want to speak about that?
I think those are great questions.
That's fine.
Yeah. On page 50, it says that this project is not, energy impacts are not cumulative because this project is not wasteful. However, and I know you've spoken to this before too, also, Glenn, that our energy system is inherently wasteful. And I just included the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, DOE, energy consumption, and so 58% of our energy generated is wasted. So that's kind of a rhetorical comment, but
I agree that the U.S. energy system is wasteful, but I think if we're going to talk about wasteful, we need to specify what kind of waste we mean. There's power plant waste, there's transmission system waste. The project itself has got a lot of requirements that it not waste energy, so I'm not sure about this comment. And I think PG&E probably shouldn't be compared straight across to the U.S. energy system as a whole because of laws in the state of California that have forced PG&E to begin to clean up its act. It's not done yet. So I'm not real sure about that comment myself.
I can strike it. I have no problem with that.
Well, it's not just up to me either. So.
Unless it touches off something for somebody else.
Well, my reading of it would be that it's not more wasteful than the average, and I think your point is that the average is pretty wasteful, and I think that's a good point, but that might not...
It's actually quite a bit less wasteful. The project is quite a bit less wasteful than the average.
Oh.
For the country.
But the average, but
the bar is set so low.
Well, and then the
bar's
other...
a ditch.
Yeah, the bar's a ditch.
The other part of that, though, when you said, does it set something off? And it does, because in the very beginning of this, under growth inducements, on table 6, well, where is it?
Can I just read my final comment
Yeah.
while you're looking,
Yes,
Michelle,
please.
just for expediency's sake? What this chapter makes very clear, if it wasn't clear before, that this project is simply too large to be absorbed easily by the Bay Area. The fact that it overruns mitigation measures, population growth, job growth, air quality attainment, traffic congestion, and other impacts means that I think the project is simply too big. And maybe some of that will be eased by the fact that they have to look at it all up front, but it's not going to be developed all up front. But I sincerely hope that some project will be, but I'm not anti-development. I just want to make that clear. I do hope that we do something with that land, and that some kind of project is approved, and maybe the problem is the scale or the timeline, either one.
Yeah, I was just going to say what it reminded me of was on the table on 6.1 on page 6-2, under greenhouse gas emissions, the DSP and DSPV, both of those are showing that they would not have a significant unmitigatable impact. Right. And I object to that because that's based on a per capita And the fact of the matter is, any project we do out there other than energy generation only will have a significant unavoidable impact. And then on noise and vibration, the same thing. It will have a significant impact,
It won't be temporary.
and it won't be temporary.
One question I have about this whole thing is that, you know, we already quarreled considerably with the notion that the developer-supported plans would not have a significant greenhouse gas impact because of all the assumptions that are built into them may not, in fact, come to pass. But do we need to repeat all those things that we said earlier in this chapter? I mean, because we've already said that we thought the greenhouse impact of the developer-supported plans was underestimated. So do we have to go through all that again, or how does that work?
I think that we just need to note that we object to this based on previous comments. Object to
Okay.
the chart
Well, it also-
suggesting that.
It's contrary to their findings on page 6-17, where they state that significant cumulative impact and cumulatively considerable project contributions would be taking place with all 4 scenarios with regards to greenhouse gas emissions or air quality.
That's air quality, yeah.
Air quality.
I think with air quality, they've been pretty consistent in acknowledging
Yeah.
impact.
I think
Haven't they?
something that can be done, since this, if you feel that they're repeating things, when we get comments back and review them, you can tack on more evidence
Okay.
from these chapters if you want to do that, rather than write the same comment again.
Yeah.
It's a suggestion.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking that on your spreadsheet, maybe if we added another column that shows what other chapters that comment might potentially pertain to. Just a thought.
I think we've abandoned the spreadsheet,
Oh,
the
okay.
comments on comments. So where are we now?
I'm done with my comments.
Yeah, I just want to say that on page 6-24, under geology, soils, and seismicity, less than significant cumulative impact.
We disagreed with that, I think.
We disagree with that, but one of the reasons I think that they can say that is the draft environmental impact report is the impact the project will have on the environment, not the impact the environment will have on the ultimate project. So if we build the project and then we have a significant earthquake and the project collapses, that's the effect of the environment on the project, not the project on the environment. Now, if the project collapses and kills a bunch of people, then that would be the project on the environment.
But didn't we also talk about the possibility of lateral creep or squishing
Yes.
out of?
Yes, we did. And so that we think that needs to be further studied, because we do think that is significant. And you can actually kind of, it's hard to tell in the lagoon and in the riprap on the east side of 101 directly adjacent to the Bayland soil processing, if that is siltation from their dust or if it is actually oozing from the site. So I don't know. That hasn't been checked. Be interesting to do an analysis of that, like a core sample of both of those areas.
Indeed.
Matter of fact, I think that they should do one core sample of both of those areas to see whether that is just normal siltation or if there is indeed the cream sandwich effect happening from the weight of the Bayland soil processing.
Stop messing with my Oreo.
Is there anything else on this section?
I had one,
Yeah,
not on the section, on the chapter.
on the chapter. That's what I mean.
You mean on the chapter?
On the chapter.
So this is right on the very first page, and it's on the chart. talking about biological resources.
Oh, yeah.
And this is weird.
Yeah.
It says significant unavoidable impact only for the community proposed plan.
Oh, yeah, I read that too.
And so two comments. First of all, I don't agree, or I don't think at this time, I don't feel so confident that the other variants won't have impacts.
I think they all will have significant
Right,
and mitigatable impacts.
But I don't understand why the community proposed plan was singled out here. That doesn't seem to be justified by anything that I read in the chapter on the section on biological resources. And I did go back and flip through that section again to see why the community-supported plan seemed to have this scarlet SU stamped on its forehead when none of the other variants did, and I couldn't find it. So it could just be a typo, but it's weird.
It could be because having a stadium would,
Well, but no, this is a community proposed, which doesn't have a stadium.
oh, I
I mean, the
thought,
variant is the
Is the
Recology project.
project.
Yeah.
But the Recology project doesn't really take place near the biologically significant areas of the site, does it?
I agree with you, Glenn, that seems
I just didn't understand this.
perplexing.
And it was weird that it was only mentioned here, and I couldn't find anything
I mean,
when
if
I
you look-
went back and looked at the biological resources part.
I mean, if you look at page 620 under cumulative impact significance project scenario contribution, they all LCS, so
Yeah.
it's further,
Internally inconsistent,
it
too.
seems to be.
So probably just a mistake, but
huh, that's weird. Okay.
Okay.
Elena, Sean? Okay. So, shall we go on to alternatives?
yeah.
One of the things that was a great disappointment to me, and that I think is going to come back to really bite us in the, is that we did not study the Kriebel alternative, or that at the same level of intensity as the other four variants. We were led to believe that that wouldn't be, that would be just fine and not to worry about it, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Anyway, so do we want to, does anyone want to lead through this section?
Sure, I just have a few things.
Okay.
Once again, on page 11 of Chapter 5, we have a listing of the unavoidable impacts that would result from the project, I'm assuming in all four variants. And several of the ones that we identified as at least potentially significant and unavoidable are missing. So this thing is very repetitious, and it's, I guess my kind of question for Terry is, do we need to go through and flag them every time that they're missing and say, we quarreled with that back in Chapter 4, do we need to quarrel with it again? So that was all. It's another location where project-related impacts are listed. And we have some additions, and our additions, do we have to add them ourselves, or will they do that? Oh, this was a kind of a small comment. Page 26. This is about the general plan build out. Yes, this is discussing the no project general plan build out. And it's in the table on page 26, right about in the middle of the page. And it says, by reducing employment within the project site as compared to project site development, that is the 4 variations, the general plan build-out would likely fall short of creating the critical mass needed to support robust expansion of transit services needed to meet this objective. And I don't get that, because the transit services are going to be dependent on a lot of things besides what happens on the Baylands. So it just didn't seem proper to me to say that Baylands development short of the project would somehow torpedo Muni's plans and Caltrain's plans, and that just seemed a bit of a stretch to me.
Yeah, I agree. Also, there's nothing that says we have to produce growth inducements as being a good thing.
Kind of crazy. Let's see.
Actually, just going back to growth inducements for a second, at the very beginning, the paragraph about growth inducements to discuss the ways in which the proposed project could foster economic or population growth.
Where are you, Michelle?
Back on page 6-3.
On page 6, or chapter 6?
Chapter 6, 6-3. I forgot to mention this.
You wanted to go back to.
Yeah. Was that this thing at the beginning, this discuss ways in which the proposed project could foster economic or population growth or the construction of housing? It makes it sound that,
Wait a minute.
just the way this is worded is kind of weird, because foster isn't
Oh,
like
I
a
see.
positive word, like it should foster growth, and then it says, it must not be assumed, at the end of that paragraph, it says, it must not be assumed that growth in any area is necessarily beneficial, detrimental, or of little significance to the environment. And yet the whole paragraph sort of kind of pushes it to make it sound like growth is good.
Well,
And so it's really contradictory.
I don't really like it either, but that whole paragraph is a quote from CEQA guidelines, so I don't think there's
Right.
a whole lot we can do about it.
I know, but it says, the last sentence says, it must not be assumed that growth in any area is necessarily beneficial, detrimental, or of little significance to the environment. And here it's making it sound like it would be detrimental if we didn't grow, because then we couldn't build we wouldn't
Transit.
support all the
Yeah.
transit services. So that's in direct conflict of how the draft EIR is supposed to be presented. That's saying that a growth inducement is a benefit.
True enough, but there's plenty of growth going to happen anyway. And
Right.
it just seems like there's plenty to support transit. I mean,
Yeah.
heaven forbid there are no transit improvements when nobody will ever move ever again. Okay, where were we?
We were on section N on page 5-26.
Okay, well, that was all I had to say about it. I don't know if anybody else has got any comments on that. Tina?
I didn't really get a chance to finish plowing through this section.
I just gave it kind of I gave it a quick read.
Perusal.
Oh, my next comment is page 544. Table at the top of the page. And the table is addressing renewable energy generation alternatives. This is the Crubble plan. You know.
Uh-huh.
And essentially they're talking about the energy generation potential of fixed axis photovoltaics versus single axis tracking photovoltaic systems. And I just would like to express the wish that they would translate these terms a little bit, maybe through footnotes, because I read a fair amount of renewable energy stuff for lay people, but I didn't understand what some of these terms meant, and I especially didn't quite understand the two lines. The first one saying capacity, and then the second one saying generation/capacity. What does that mean exactly? It just wasn't clear to me. Maybe you know.
My take on what the capacity is, the installed capacity with 100% efficiency. So if it was perfectly sunny every day, so in other words, the maximum that the solar cells could produce,
Okay.
irregardless of how much weather or other impacts there might be.
Got that.
Yeah.
So that's capacity. So then, what do you think generation capacity means? And why is it? So if you look at the left-hand column, and elsewhere in this document it says fixed axis PV systems are probably the best if you want to maximize the energy generation potential of the land. Right? And the left-hand column, for the most part, shows larger potential than the single-axis tracking system, except
For generation.
for generation capacity. So I'm a little bit confused by what that means.
Okay, again, this is just my quick take on this, is that it's a measure of efficiency. Because the single axis tracking system follows the sun, it gets more, it generates more per capacity. So let's say each solar cell can do 100 watts. And the fixed one is only going to get 60 watts because it's not tracking the sun.
Not tracking the sun.
And the other one is going to get 90 watts, but there's fewer of them because you have smaller capacity, but of the installed capacity, you're getting more generation because of that tracking capability. So they're more efficient, and it's a measure of efficiency because it's a ratio there. The 1890 kilowatt hours over kilowatt. The over kilowatt is the over capacity. So what you're measuring is the amount they would generate. So you're basically dividing line 3 by line 2.
Yeah.
Is what's happening there.
Okay.
So you're in the left column, you're dividing 45,000 megawatt hours divided by 31.7 megawatts of capacity, and in the right column, you're dividing 29,780 megawatt hours divided by 15.7 megawatts.
So we're still better off with the left hand,
Yeah,
even though the single axis is more efficient. We're better off with.
You're going to get more energy out of it, but you're going to also not have any other use available because they're going to take up all the land. Remember, you're installing more panels, and so that reduces the amount of space that could be used for other purposes.
But it says they're both 104 acres.
Right,
My guess is just that the ones that move probably take up more space.
yeah, I've looked at this a tiny bit in the past, and when they do the fixed panels, they usually put them right up
Close together.
next to each other. And if the panel's rotating, you've got to leave space between the panels so that they don't shade each other.
Right, so therefore you have less panels and,
Therefore, you have less panels per acre.
right.
But they're more efficient.
But they're more efficient, as you said, because they're actually pointing themselves to the sun.
But the net generation would still be higher with the fixed because
Yeah.
there's still,
Yeah.
the increase in quantity does not overcome the increase in efficiency on the other
On
side.
the other hand, the overall life cycle impact of the more efficient system might be less because you're using fewer panels.
And less embedded
These are the
energy,
kinds of things
yeah.
that give people headaches.
Yeah.
I don't know, do we want?
My stuff I read prior had a little bit to do with that too, is that the moving panels often provide a lower return on investment because you have the tracking systems and they break and they consume energy
That's
and
not what this
they're
says in
expensive.
here.
Is
That's
it?
not what it says in here. It
Okay.
says that, where does it say this?
My information may be out of date then.
I'm pretty sure it says that the best return on investment is from the moving panel
Okay.
system.
Then things have changed?
Well, or, they could have picked a paper that says moving panels are the best return on investment and not pick the paper that says they're not.
It's a constantly moving field because with
Yeah.
increases in efficiency,
It is.
you
Things are
know,
changing a lot.
yeah.
It's true. When I last looked at this, it was several years ago, so.
Yeah, so. Another reason to wish maybe that this had been reviewed more thoroughly. So anyway, I think some translation of that table would be helpful, or some footnotes or something to explain some of those things. Yeah, let's see, page 543. This was a sentence that really annoyed me. But maybe now I understand it. I think I do understand it. It's the last sentence in the first section on the page. However, should the approved water supply agreement provide more supply for the project site than would actually be needed, a significant growth-inducing effect would result. And I think I did understand that after reading further, so I'll withdraw that one. Means we should be careful about approving
Too much water, because it'll
Yeah.
induce growth, which we don't want.
Right.
Well, is the build-out of Sierra Point included, that's what that water's included?
Yeah,
that water extra is water.
included in
I mean,
there.
that's the reason they're getting the extra water, is because they want to build out the existing projects on paper.
Right.
And that was all I had on chapter 5.
On Chapter 5, I do have a comment and question. It's on 5-66 under environmentally superior alternatives and the conclusions they've made here. And I have to ask the questions where it says that in the case of the Baylands, the no project, no build alternative would not be environmentally superior since it allows existing site contamination to remain without remediation. I have a question. Did they look at the current conditions, but what if did they study about what if the current conditions were compliant with current laws and current ordinances? Right now, the current conditions are not compliant in that they've never officially closed the dump site, et cetera. And then also, would that become the superior alternative over time if left alone? And it doesn't make any mention of future state. And I don't know whether the EIR can make any statement or study over future state. I mean, they certainly have made a lot over future state if development moves forward, but they haven't talked anything at all about if nothing happens, nothing further happens, or indeed if they become compliant with current laws. Because when they bought the site, or, you know, it was on track for being a Superfund site, and they're not compliant currently with either use permits, ordinances, and official closure of the dump site and the requirements to officially close the landfill site. So I would like to know if how environmentally superior the no project, no build alternative would be if the site were brought compliant with current use permits, ordinances, and laws. And 2, how the no project, no build alternative would be if we did nothing. Would it be the superior alternative 30 years from now? As compared to any of the other alternatives. Because you're looking at all the other ones on the 30-year build-out timeline, you need to look at the no project, no build alternative on a 30-year timeline as well. And then the next part, the no project general plan build out, would be environmentally superior since it provides for future development of the site as envisioned in the general plan, reduces or avoids many of the significant effects of the project site development, et cetera, et cetera. My question on that is, that wasn't studied at the level, and neither was the third alternative studied at the level of the project. So what's the impact of that? And how can they make
If they
it?
get chosen, then they would have to be studied.
Right, right. But is it a detriment to them being called the environmentally superior alternative that they make a decision on these things without knowing without having done the groundwork to determine that?
You've written it down.
Okay, that's it for that I have for this. Anybody else have anything on this? Do we want to go on to our favorite chapter, sustainability, or do we want to, since we've discussed a great deal of that already, what do we want to do? What's the committee's pleasure?
Nap time.
Nap time?
I have one comment on the sustainability chapter.
Okay.
Actually, I have two comments on it. One is that it could certainly use a better definition of sustainability, which
Talks about that, yeah.
yeah, which some economists say says use renewable resources only at the rate at which they can regenerate. Use non-renewable resources only as renewable replacements become available. In terms of resource use. And the second thing I think I've also already said, or somebody has, and that is how do you develop, what does sustainability mean for Brisbane? And I think because resources are really planetary wide in some ways. So we're wrestling with that on the Sustainability Committee, but I think the definition here is pretty wimpy and that this chapter is not particularly useful.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because if you look at this on the very first page about the following key contributions to an unsustainable future, doing anything on the Baylands pretty much contributes to every one of these things. Overconsumption, rapid population growth, even population growth at all at this point is no longer sustainable.
Correct.
So this should be zero, any population growth, rapid or otherwise, is not sustainable. Completely dependent on non-renewable resources and ones that can't be renewed fast enough, as fast as we're using them. There's definitely going to be an accumulation of toxic and harmful substances in the biosphere because even if it says zero for greenhouse gases, because it's on a per capita basis, the fact of the matter is it will produce greenhouse gases, and that is a cumulative thing that doesn't go away. And then disregard for complex natural systems and pursuing human development, well, that's pretty obvious. Just where are the birds and bats going to go? And the fish and the frogs and everything else. And then social inequities in resource distribution, well, that's a really big one because there's going to be a big social inequity between the have-nots and the people who are going to be making a heck of a lot of money on the development, and the poor taxpayers who will be having to support the infrastructure. And then limited public participation in political and economic decision-making. Well, we're participating, but it is pretty limited. It's down to 6 here and 10 there. So I don't know, I'm it's kind of disgusting. And then on page 7.3 it says, using but not depleting limited resources. It's really using but not destroying limited resources. Okay, anything else on this?
Oh, I'm sure I do. Mary and I already talked about their definition of sustainability and had a good laugh about it, I think, even.
Yeah, one of my questions is who pays for the free transit passes? You know,
The employers, I
yeah.
think.
For the free, what classes?
Free transit passes. It
Oh.
talks about free transit passes. And in this chart, it talks about require use of electrically powered landscape equipment through CCNRs. I object to using CCNRs for any kind of oversight or control because it's impossible to use CCNRs in that way and have them be effective.
And
CCNRs are, pardon?
What page is that?
That's on this chart on 7-5.
And what are CCNRs?
Pardon?
What are they?
something, it's
And
basically like a
restrictions.
rental
Covenants,
agreement.
conditions, and restrictions
Yeah.
on a deed, land deed. For example, at the Northeast Ridge, is part of the CCNRs, that you can't build a solid fence, and that fence has to be open and able for fly-through. It took us 3 years to enforce that with one person who built a solid fence.
Yeah, and people still wash their cars outside their homes all the time in Brisbane. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, and that's not permitted, and the city doesn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Oh, totally irrelevant, but exciting. So I'm walking by the place on San Bruno right next to your house, the place that they're doing all the work on, and they concreted 50% of the yard, and I was just like,
I know.
how did that get past the planning commission, and is that concrete permeable?
No.
No, it's not. So, I mean, I thought we were supposed to be having permeable concrete, and
No.
where's that? I don't know.
allowed
Yeah.
in Brisbane.
Permeable concrete is not allowed?
My understanding is that city engineer won't permit it because they're worried about water loosening hillsides.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've been quite upset about the whole thing and asked the same questions, and no, it's not permeable. And it's a huge slab of concrete, but I guess they installed some fancy drain to take care of whatever. Nothing I could do about it, believe me. If I could, I would.
Well, the same thing as the interpretation of the lot coverage, the Tulare Street Hill House, the one on, on Tulare Hill on Thomas Avenue, 8 Thomas Avenue, the one they're discussing. The plans call for a 650 square foot courtyard that's completely surrounded on 4 sides by walls of the house, and that is not considered as part of their lot coverage. And that is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. An interior courtyard is not considered part of the lot coverage.
Yeah.
Are we done with our meeting?
Yeah.
Well, we're done.
I have
I'm
a
just
couple
wondering,
of
because if you're
little.
going to talk about this,
Yeah,
Really
no,
are you doing it off?
Okay. So on 7-9, dedicated landscape meters, well, how many times have I watched people's sprinklers, broken sprinkler heads pouring water all over? So I was going to suggest that the mitigation measure includes some form of alarm so that people can be made aware when something is broken and pouring everywhere. Instead of just waiting for their water bill to come. And then we also need to address water pressure and flow at lavatories, because I can't, every time I walk into the bathroom, it seems that sink controls only have 2 positions, dribbling and torrent. So that, you know, this is really piddly stuff, but I just want to stick it in there because I'm afraid if I don't, we'll forget later on.
You know, on the same lines, I think that automatic flush toilets should be disallowed.
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird, but sometimes you wiggle and they start flushing. And then also that the low flow, high flow, be adjustable to actual reasonable amounts so that you're not over flushing and under flushing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Glenn, please.
I personally have not finished a thorough review of all the suggested mitigation measures, and we might want to put that off until next
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah, I agree.
But I did have a couple that I wanted to suggest under greenhouse gas emissions.
What page?
This would be the table on page 7-5. And the two mitigation measures that I would like to suggest are commissioning of all buildings.
What?
Commissioning of all buildings, that's basically, it's a review of all the equipment to make sure that it's working the way it is supposed to.
Okay.
And it has to be done by probably a licensed person of some sort. And then the second thing I wanted to suggest, and this is partly thanks to one of the links that Barbara sent out, is that if we're going to require smart meters in all these homes and programmable thermostats, which for some reason is under the air quality mitigation measures instead of greenhouse gas mitigation measures. But in any case, if we're going to do that, why don't we require in-home energy displays, which work well with a smart meter system and seem demonstrably to help people reduce their energy use.
Can we include not just in-home energy displays, but commercial building energy?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all building energy.
all buildings.
Personally, I don't feel done with
Not at
reviewing
all.
this chapter. I didn't get that far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read it
I
once
didn't read it.
before, and I have some scribbles on it, but that was at the beginning, and I really need to reread it, I think.
Okay, so any more comments for this evening? We still have a couple more items, and we really want to get out of here quickly so that we meet our timeline. So if there's no more items on this, I'd just like to talk about our agenda for next time. We will not be doing our regular meeting items. Those get, because we do not know whether we get an extension or not, and this is a much higher priority. At the next meeting, I would like us to be able to review whatever comments have already been made that with comments from Terry Rivas-Plata. And then we should also revisit sustainability. And we should also, all of us, kind of review what we've already done individually throughout, or kind of just flip through your whole fun book, maybe with the index next to you, and bring back any other, this is a time for a roundup of any other comments, questions, things that are, bothering you, niggling on your brain, of all the chapters that we've already gone through. And next meeting would be the time to bring them to the table, or else send them to Natalie this week to be included in our general comments.
I had submitted comments on air quality. It didn't look like from the minutes that those were looked at all. That was one of the meetings I didn't make, but I still submitted comments.
We,
I think we did.
yeah, I thought we looked at them. We definitely,
We did look at them.
Okay, well, it wasn't mentioned in the minutes, and that was the meeting that you guys were up in the little room, so there wasn't a video I could review either.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You guys tell me. I wasn't here.
can you make sure, Natalie, that Barbara's comments on air quality were included in our comment packets? So that's kind of what I think that is on tap for the next meeting. Is there anything else that we really need to cover at the next meeting that you guys can think of right now that needs to be agendized, besides requesting an extension from the city council? Could you please add that to the agenda? Support?
Anything?
Hmm?
Can't think of anything.
Are we all in support of?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure. Okay, approval of the minutes. Is there any correction to the minutes, Barbara? It sounds like you had a correction to the minutes.
No, that was actually for the meeting before.
Oh,
This
for the meeting
meeting.
before. Okay,
Yeah, because I missed 2 meetings, one due to illness and one due to work.
okay.
So I will abstain from this one since I wasn't here.
Okay. So is there a,
I move to approve.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Unless there's any other business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. And thank you all for your persistence and patience in doing the draft EIR. I cannot tell you how much future generations will appreciate it.
Yeah, we're a precious commodity.
Yeah.